Okay, cool. Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our event, Work-Life Harmony, Finding Joy Amidst the Chaos. On behalf of the Young Professionals Group, I just want to say that we're really glad you're here. And to briefly set the stage before I hand this over to our speaker, I just wanted to give some context. So this event came about as a result of some really honest conversations we were having in the Young Professionals Group about feeling overwhelmed and stressed at work. It's no secret that this has been a challenging year for us, and sometimes in a remote work environment, it's, I think, easy to feel isolated and feel like you're the only one that's feeling burned out. So with this event, we, really just wanted to help people see they're not alone and also provide some tools for handling stress and navigating work challenges. So today I'm really thrilled that we have our Chief Medical Director, Luke Ciccinelli, here to discuss his philosophy on finding harmony in both work and life. He presents regularly on this topic to medical students, and as we were just saying a minute ago, is personally passionate about this topic. So it felt like the perfect fit for him to really facilitate this important conversation. We do want this to be an open discussion. We would love to encourage everyone to participate throughout the session, share your thoughts and perspective. Ultimately, we just want to learn from each other and, feel like we're all in this together, which we are. So um, we do have this scheduled for 45 minutes. We might end a little early if the discussion warrants that, but we just want to make sure we had enough time to go over Luke's presentation and then also have some time for just open discussion, Q&A kind of thing. So again, we'll save some time at the end for that, but please, everyone, feel free to jump in. And, this is a safe place to just kind of discuss everything we're going through. And so thank you, Luke, for taking the time out of your schedule to share your wisdom and insight. And I'll let you take it from here.
My pleasure, Bertie. Thank you. I think it's a wonderful topic. Hi, everybody. This can be very informal. I don't pretend to be any sort of guru from some mountaintop or anything like that, but for many years at the national meetings, people have asked me to talk about this type of topic. I think probably the thing that might jump out at you right away is that I call this work-life harmony rather than work-life balance. I really don't believe that balance exists. I think it's really a misnomer. And the analogy I would use, and I love to try to make up analogies if for lots of things, I just think they help with work, with friendships, even parenting and so forth, try to make examples of things that are relatable. So I always like to say it's like an orchestra. I think our work and our personal lives is more like an orchestra. I don't think there's any like perfect balance. You have a total of 10, you have 5 and 5. It just doesn't seem to work that way. So I think it's more like an orchestra, our lives, where different instruments are playing at different times and different intensities for different lengths and so forth. And so as long as we can find harmony within that, we do really well and things sound good and we feel good. And then we can always tell when it doesn't quite sound right. So finding joy amidst the chaos. Well, at the ACFAS meeting, which is the annual scientific meeting for the American College of Foot and Ankle Surgeons, for the last several years, they've asked me to moderate and participate in these sessions. And I thought I'd pull one of the slides from just this past year in February, where I posed to everybody the question, like, what is your good life? And I think that's at the heart of finding joy in our personal lives and harmony with work, because it's really personal. Everyone's consideration of or perception of their own personal contentment, fulfillment, joy. It's really no one size fits all. So in the sense of this talk, though, and how Bertie sort of laid it out, I want to try to give you strategies or share strategies that I use that have seemed to have been successful. I mean, I feel like a pretty happy guy. I feel like my wife, our family, our kids, so we feel pretty good on a regular basis. So maybe some strategies will help that we use. And I think probably one of the real sort of joy crushers or joy killers is everyone takes their job really seriously and they do an amazing job day in and day out. And then they get home. And I think everyone's just overwhelmed once they get back home with a whole nother laundry list of to-dos and tasks. And basically, we're so overstimulated in society nowadays that it's just constant decision making and trying to triage all the requests. I mean, from our cell phones, all these pending tasks. And so I like to share this matrix. It's actually called the Eisenhower matrix, I believe, after President Eisenhower. But if you look at it, I think it's really simple but insightful in that essentially when we deal with things on our plate, you can really break them down into important and urgent or important and not urgent. I mean, there's either an urgency or an importance to them. And if you look at them, block one, obviously, where something's important and urgent needs to get done, right? So we do it, and you can read through there. You could share the lecture later if you'd like, Bertie, or someone can snap pictures with their cell phone, stuff like that if they want to. But I like to simplify things. I think a lot of joy in life gets lost in the clutter. And what we have to do is we have to try to find our own mechanisms and strategies to simplify things. And so really, when we're talking about our personal lives, quite frankly, and this may seem funny to you, but I think you can really actually just look at box 1 and box 2. Essentially, if something's important and it's not urgent, we just need to schedule it. Let's get it on a schedule. And then the delegate and the delete, if you read through what they say there, delegate, for example, tasks that need to get done but don't really need your expertise. Delete tasks that distract you from your own personal things you'd like to do. Of course, this is talking about finding the joy and getting back to the joy when you feel things are chaotic. So you know what I do with those 2 boxes? I nix them. I just get rid of them because they don't have anything to do with bringing you joy. If you read them, I'll just go back a slide. Basically, what they do is they just add more oil to the fire. They just sort of overwhelm us. So you can really, quite frankly, when you're trying to find that harmony, get back to harmony or maintain harmony, I really recommend people look at the delegate and the delete in their personal lives. And work might be a little different. You can't just delete everything. You can't just delegate everything. But nevertheless, when we're talking about a harmonious existence between our day jobs and then going home and trying to feel good as an individual, well, I believe you can just nix them. The other thing that I really like is the concept of ikigai, which is a Japanese concept. And you'll see this slide. I have it a couple of different times. And again, I only have like 8 or 9 slides here. But I really like this concept of ikigai, which is the center here of essentially a big Venn diagram, where a nice way to look at your good life, your version of your best life, is where right in the center you feel the most fulfilled around all the things that are important to you. Certainly work is one of them. Maybe something that you're super good at, something that you really have a sense of calling or dharma or a sense of vocation. Certainly down at the bottom, you can see there, we need to make a living, right? We need to be able to provide for ourselves. And financial stress is probably one of the most paralyzing and gripping stresses that lots of people go through. And so ikigai, though, is a concept that the Japanese use as a lifelong process. It tends to get a lot more play in the United States when people get toward retirement, but the Japanese really use it as a lifestyle. So I like to make people aware of that concept. Certainly, this is just a short talk and conversation, but you can go, you can dig deeper and look up these things and get into it more if you like to. But as you can see, passion, mission, profession, vocation, what you're good at, what you love to do, and so forth. These are really, really great things to think about. And when you think about maintaining or bringing back joy in your life and trying to get some order back when things feel chaotic, I like to blend those 2 diagrams or pictures here, the ikigai with the Eisenhower matrix. And essentially, it's about getting things on your schedule over to the do list in a prioritized type fashion, right? So as you go down your do list, some of the things you have scheduled, well, you finish one thing that you'd like to do. Maybe it's a bucket list, maybe it's vacation, maybe it's a hobby, maybe it's dinner, maybe it's a trip, maybe it's any sort of leisure activity that brings you happiness and content and makes you feel good. Then you just get the other things scheduled. So they're important, but they weren't urgent. but then you get them scheduled and then you get them done and you sort of move forward that way. The other thing that I really embrace personally is what I call the four-legged stool. And I really like this example, and it really blends the emotional, spiritual, mental, and physical aspects of all of us as individuals. And obviously, when the stool gets wobbly or a leg breaks, we feel very off center. And I think what's really valuable about the four-legged stool approach to this is realizing that a lot of our joy in life with work-life harmony gets into like one of those boxes. And maybe we're really strong in one of those legs of the stool, but as individuals, all of us in our own ways have different elements and different factors within those four components that make us unique and bring us joy or block our joy. And so, I mean, it's all about self-care. I think a huge part of finding the joy back into a harmonious life is realizing where it has disappeared. So I think essentially we get very, very saturated with work. We get very, very saturated. And what we all need is we need decompression points, decompression strategies, where on a daily basis, I really believe on a daily basis, if not absolutely on a weekly basis, we have to find ways to, I sort of call it wring out the towel. I mean, we just get saturated. We just get maybe mentally saturated at work, and we have to wring that towel out and we have to bring it back. And if you look at these four, I like to think of little different things around each one. So mentally, when we think about getting totally saturated mentally and the stool gets imbalanced and we feel like just down, blah, unenthused, overwhelmed. I mean, I like to think of ways to in real life that we get things back on track. So I think the mental component is basically like a hard drive. It's like a computer hard drive. What do we do with hard drives? We defragment them, we reboot, we turn them off when we go home at night. We need to do the same thing mentally. We need to find a decompression mode for ourselves so that we can reboot. Our minds are kind of nowadays like our cell phones. I mean, they go down all day long, the bars are dropping. It's just natural. It's normal for all of us. So we have to find a way to plug that back in. And so on one of the stools here, on the mental, to me, I think a nice analogy is our minds are constantly whirring, constantly going. We've got to reboot, defragment, scan the disk, turn it off, let it recharge, and push the on and off button. Find ways to do that each day, particularly at the end of the day. Physically, the physical leg of the stool, to me, a nice analogy there is just nature, natural laws. It's just like a garden. Our bodies are basically a garden. We've got to pull the weeds. We've got to fertilize them. We've got to have, adequate hydration. We got to water the plants. We have to get back out. And as far as decompressing on the physical side, it's very, very easy. Bertie talked about the remote work environment. It's very easy to sit at a desk, stare at a screen all day, never stand up, never go outside. We have to find ways, again, strategies to decompress on the physical side of the four-legged stool, that leg. And it can be anything. No one needs to run marathons or certain thing that anyone else does. It's about nature, walking, getting out, getting moving, getting breathing, getting oxygen, getting out of the environment that you're in for the majority of the workday. And that almost always brings back joy. I mean, one of the best treatments for depression, quite frankly, is just nature. Nature, light, air, vitamin D. And of course, there's lots of other ways to help with that, with depression. But one of the oldest standbys and so effective is sort of getting back into the flow of life and seeing nature and seeing all the beauty that's around us. On the emotional side, we're all a big bag of emotions. We all have the things that trigger us and the things that don't trigger us. Some of us might be more resilient than others. Some might be more stoic than others. Some of us might be more sensitive or labile for certain things that get us going or don't. And I think a really, really useful analogy with our emotions is just to consider it like the weather. I came across that a few years ago, and our emotions are really just like the weather. It's like you could have a cloudy day in the morning, and then it could be sunny in the afternoon. It could be perfectly sunny, and all of a sudden you get a thunderstorm. And you could have a basically overcast day, and then all of a sudden you're like, wow, it's all cleared up. I mean, we need to, with the emotional leg, I think it's really helpful to consider our emotions as just basically the weather, and be able to step back a little bit and say to ourselves when we feel different things, well, it's just like the weather. It's gonna, today's the way it is, and tomorrow's the way it is, and the weather comes and goes, on cycles within the day, within a week, and so forth. And if we step back and we think about that, I think it really helps us recognize that is very, very normal. It's very, very normal. No 2 days are exactly alike. And our moods and our emotions are not going to be exactly alike any days. And it can fluctuate very, very rapidly on a daily basis. The spiritual leg of the four-legged stool, again, thinking of recognition of how we all are, and where maybe joy has gotten lost. I think the spiritual aspect of this is really important. And I think it becomes more and more important to lots of people as they get older and they start to assess sort of what I would call, beginning with the end in mind. What has our life meant? Do we feel like we're pursuing the things? And you'll see that Ikigai diagram a few more times here. Do we feel like we're really pursuing the things that make us feel whole? And, essentially, I'm not a theologian or anything like that, but I mean, we all share the same seed of divinity. I mean, it's indisputable, right? We all came from the same seed of divinity, with, conception. Whatever your religion is, it doesn't really matter. We all got here the same way. And so within everybody's sense of spirituality, as you go through life, I think we essentially all have to make a decision about, life has painful moments, and we have to sort of decide what our pain will be. Will it be sort of the pain of discipline, or the pain of regret? And I think in the spiritual sense, it's very, very good to create just good habits that keep you spiritually focused and thinking about not having regrets, because the pain of daily habits and making strategies for yourself to keep the four-legged stool balanced, those daily habits weigh ounces. They really weigh ounces. And yet the pain of regret weighs tons. And what people do oftentimes is I think they paint themselves into a corner by deferring on a lot of these concepts. And then they get older and older. A decade goes by pretty quickly. Another decade goes by. And then they start to feel like, wow, what was the significance of what I was doing? Was I really doing what I wanted to do? And a nice way to keep things in order, I think, is to create a couple strategies. I have put in here financial stability, and I really honestly believe that most folks have a really hard time managing their finances, and yet there's so many resources out there. And I'm not a financial planner or anything like that, but I really always recommend, particularly talking to young practitioners, residents, fellows, people starting out in private practice in my field. And I think for everybody, we need to make a hobby. It doesn't have to be a job. It just needs to be a real hobby in a couple, maybe just one of the two people in a relationship. Doesn't have to be both. So everyone's going nuts about finances all the time, but financial literacy and fluency can really, really help people get more comfortable and find and enjoy joyful experiences, because people get overextended very quickly and they don't really act their wage. And that's a David Ramsey line, and that's a great resource if people are familiar with David Ramsey. That's his line, to give credit where credit's due. But a lot of folks get caught up in what's called the golden handcuffs, where they get overextended and they're on a treadmill. They're on a treadmill financially, where the two ends of the candle are burning, and they just have expenses and income, and it doesn't quite add up, and it creates more and more stress. And then that takes away from the harmony outside of work into their personal life, because then they feel that they have a lot of other issues and concerns to deal with. The biggest thing about financial stability that I've seen throughout my career with partners, and even my wife's and myself, the way we've no experts or anything like that, but the bottom line is, if we keep things under control, everybody, it really gives us freedom of choice. And that's where real happiness and contentment comes from. It really comes from having the freedom of choice to do what you would like to do. It doesn't have to be extravagant. It could be, again, back to the four-legged stool. It could be simply going out for a walk, going for a bike ride, doing whatever you would like to do with the freedom of choice, because you're not necessarily having to work an extra job or overtime or longer hours or a side hustle on the weekend, things like that, that take away from a lot of the opportunities for a more pleasurable life. The other thing I always say, even say to our kids, you can resolve almost anything in life by just asking yourself 3 questions in the following order. Is it a priority? Yes or no? Do you have the time? Yes or no? And do you have the money? Yes or no? You can resolve almost anything. You say to yourself, is it a priority? If the answer is no, well, forget about it. What else do you want to talk about? If it is a priority, you say yes. You say, okay, well, do you have the time? Well, no, I don't have the time. I don't have vacation time. Or no, I've got to do something else. But if you say yes, then your next question is, well, do we have the finances to do it? So priority, time, or money, from everything from a holiday to a vacation to a purchase to a relationship to going on a date, anything, you can put it right through that 3-word filter. And essentially, again, I'm all about simplicity. So I look for simple little hacks or tools to help myself decompress. Doesn't have to be more and more complicated. You want your non-work life to actually bring you peace and happiness rather than more tasks and more decision making and more chaos, right? So I like financial stability. I think that's a really important point for people to always be thinking about. The other thing that I think happens that robs a lot of people from joy is we're not really necessarily what we do. Now, some people may be perfectly aligned with what they do being who they are, but I always like to tell people, particularly after years of studying a certain thing, like let's say podiatric medicine and surgery or anything, accounting, law, I always tell people to return to who we were. And what I mean by that is to find and reconnect with what's called parallel passions, things that we always like to do before our current, let's just call it day job, because we all get sidetracked by work. It's the most sort of overbearing thing or most consistent thing we all tend to do on a daily basis. And I think as years go by, it's extremely common for all of us, myself included, to start to sort of forget who we were before we had the job that we currently have. And I think it's incredibly healthy and brings a lot of joy back to people when they start to reconnect with things that they were once interested in, and then they maintain those as parallel passions. So examples might be a sport hobby. Someone may have been in the band or orchestra in high school. Someone might have been in high school theater. Someone may have liked to do ballroom dancing. Someone might was maybe into archery. You can make up a million examples, and I'm sure everybody listening has some things of their own. And then the folks that you used to do those things with, high school, college, or some other social group that have nothing to do with your job, are wonderful ways to reconnect with parallel passions that always brought you joy before we sort of became robotic in the work world, attached to beeping phones and computers and, constant media feeds and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's really important to always stop and say to ourselves, we're not necessarily what we do every day. We're individuals, and we have skills, and we have jobs, and we have knowledge bases, but we're so much more than that, which even goes right back to that four-legged stool and the sense of ikigai, about looking at all the things that give us pleasure and joy and trying to keep them all present. I also have definitely found in life, particularly in the medical profession, that when people are personally imbalanced, it affects their professional competence and satisfaction. So if you reverse engineer that, you say to yourself, at least I do, well, if I'm not really satisfied, I'm not really doing that great or happy at work, or work's really chaotic and I don't really feel like there's a lot of joy, I always think, well, let's go back to who we are. And that's why I put it in here. Return to who you were, return to who you really feel you are, and be living with that truth to yourself, living your own truth. And then that actually helps with job satisfaction. There's a lot of people whose job performance and satisfaction suffers because they aren't taking care of themselves. They sort of can't get out of their own way, or they're not practicing a lot of self-care, either lack of recognition, or they're not finding mechanisms to decompress. I really think that the end of each workday, any way that anyone chooses to decompress, what I always like to say is it should be considered as part of your workday. In other words, if you're going to work 8 hours or 9 hours or 7 hours or 10 hours, I always consider it, well, the day's not done or hasn't really started until we've done something for ourselves. We have to sort of build it in. That's my philosophy. You build it into your actual work environment, and that helps keep it very, very present. I also think an amazing source of vitality for people is volunteerism. And it's just so refreshing and rewarding for so many people to be giving of themselves, because it gets back to human connection. And I really mean volunteerism in person. Okay, actually out there participating. I know I see a lot on teams and things. A lot of folks do that, and frankly, I think it's wonderful. I always give the caution while learning to politely say no, because what happens is, and I have it down here, the poison's in the dose. This is what happens to all of us at different phases, or in different phases, different times in life. We overdo everything. And so the dose gets overdosed. And anything we take on, and even volunteerism is one of those, if we all of a sudden go nutso and it's unsustainable, eventually it just becomes another stressor. And what we're trying to do is de-stress. We're trying to decompress. We don't want to, in our free time, give ourselves additional stressors that feel so good, but then when we overdose it, it becomes a negative, right? And so that's why I always say volunteerism is phenomenal, and it's a tremendous source of vitality. But we also have to be careful with giving too much of ourselves. In a sense, we have to really practice self-care, find those parallel passions, keep our stool balanced, be aware that all of us have wobbly legs at different times on a day, it could be daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly basis. We all do. And the wobbly leg may be different. It may even be different for one of us in different phases of the year or times of the year, even seasons. Okay, could even be around different anniversaries of different life events within the family and so forth. But finding those ways to recognize that and then act on them is really, really helpful for getting back to the joy. The other thing that I think is really important is to have the ability to change. And of course, with the company, everyone's been talking about change. I think there's all the cliches out there, right? It's the only constant and so forth. Quite frankly, I think it's nice to think of phases in life. And I sort of say 5 to 7 year cycles. Someone could say 3 to 5, someone could say 7 to 10. I think it's very, 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 very common for people to get to certain points in their lives and ask themselves these types of questions. Is this it? Is this all there is? And what you're really asking ourselves there, when we don't feel the joy anymore and we're wondering, is sort of these existential questions, right? It's really about do we feel like what we do for a living, how we provide for ourselves, and who we work with and who we work for, is it really in alignment with our personal values? And I think a lot of times our own personal values no longer coincide necessarily with our day job. And so it's so important to keep these things present and be sure that we're living a life true to our own personal values. And you don't get this incongruous personal value struggle versus what you're doing on a daily basis. I like to say we need to be living our lives while we're alive. Certainly life is the great one-act play, and this is not a dress rehearsal. It's just not a dress rehearsal. This is it. So I always encourage people to consider potential end-of-life situations, right? And that may sound dark and morbid, but I don't mean it that way at all. I think it's extremely healthy every now and then to say to ourselves, well, what might be a potential regret I might have at end of life, or 10 years or 20 years, hopefully 100 years, hopefully 50 years from now. But to consider those now and act on them is really, really nice in keeping the joy and keeping the fulfillment present. And I've highlighted here, be a nonconformist. I can tell you all the literature out there that you might read, a couple millennial, quite frankly, Being a nonconformist is about the healthiest thing you can possibly do. Marching to your own drummer, identifying the things that make you feel joy, feel fulfilled, not being worried about what society thinks. And of course, it's very, very hard in the social media world where so much is based on comparison. But the folks who embrace nonconformity in a healthy fashion, I'm not suggesting anyone go blowing up buildings and things like that. Like, obviously we're coming up on an anniversary here tomorrow, but I'm not suggesting anybody do that. What I'm talking about is being a healthy nonconformity where you're living your life true to your own personal strategic vision of how you would like your life to be through the decades. A couple of fun questions to ask ourselves when you think about ikigai is, what gives you goosebumps? It's a funny question. You probably haven't ever been asked, right? What gives you goosebumps? What's the last thing that ever gave you goosebumps? What got you really excited as a kid or in college or a trip or something like that? Ask yourself these types of questions and then look at them through the sense of ikigai and the blend of all those different components on the Venn diagram. I'll wrap this up here so we can have some questions as well, and conversation, of course. And then I already mentioned this, but what's one regret you don't want to have? I think that's really, really, really important. The bottom line is, if you look at like hospice nursing literature and end-of-life decisions and things like that, what folks find as they get toward end-of-life decision-making is they regret not having maintained the relationships. It could be siblings, could be parents and child, could be relationships with a spouse or an ex-spouse or family. It's all about the relationships that they regret they didn't mend, and then things that they had wished they had done that they never got to do. Nobody regrets the things they did that didn't necessarily turn out the way that they would have liked them to. They regret the things that they meant to do that would have brought them more joy, that were on their list that they would have liked to do, that they never got to do. And so that's why I think it's so healthy to pose that question to ourselves every now and then, on an annual basis or a 6-month basis or a quarterly basis. And then I'll just conclude with this last slide, which is a summary of those that I put out earlier. And really, again, it's ikigai. Ikigai is the center of everything that we might identify for ourselves. And again, it's personal. I would ask everybody to take that ikigai Venn diagram and jot down some things in each box, and then get those items that bring you joy throughout your life, that your own unique gifts, your own unique talents and skills, and what really makes you feel great, and get it over at least into the important, not urgent, where you can schedule it and then be bumping it over on a regular basis into the into the important and urgent box. The bottom line, I think, is what we all want, where we feel most joyful. In conclusion, is I always liked Mother Teresa of Calcutta. One of her lines I always liked was, she always said the most satisfying feeling is internal peace. And I think that's exactly what we all will find our joy when we feel that sense of internal peace. And that sense of internal peace comes from, at least for myself, all these elements that I've tried to share here in this talk. And another great line, and it will be my last, is that anything that costs you your internal peace, I can tell you right now, it's too expensive. Anything that costs any one of us our internal peace is too expensive. And so we have to be our own watchdog constantly for ourselves, because taking care of ourselves helps us take care of everybody else best. And it's not being egocentric or selfish. It's actually the best way to function and feel the best, and really feel joyful amongst all the other obligations and responsibilities. So hopefully that's helpful. It's certainly just a perspective from